Welcome, everybody, to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Arehart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this meetup, our 310th, being recorded Thursday, September 19, 2024 at noon U.S. Eastern, we got me. I'm your presenter, and I'll be presenting on options for running Redis or Valkey and other alternatives, whether locally or as a service. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But before we get started, as I always do with these meetups, I want to point out that if you want to share the news about the event with other people, about the meetups, first of all, the recordings are offered always at this URL, recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. That just takes you right to a page that lists the meetup recordings and when they occurred, and you can search through them and look back through them. I also want to say that all the meetings are offered on YouTube. These are recorded on YouTube. These are live streamed to YouTube. So the recordings are actually YouTube links, and the link you have if you join the meeting is the link to view the recording. And I offer the links at this page where I track every meeting. And there's other presentations you can also find there, but this link takes you right to the list of the meetup presentations. And then if anybody's interested in speaking on the ColdFusion Meetup, you can reach out, learn more about it, and reach out to me through the URL speak.coldfusionmeetup.com. All right, let's get into the presentation. And in particular, I want to say that unlike most of my talks, which are to the CF audience, people using ColdFusion, Adobe ColdFusion, or Lucee, this talk and this presentation, this recording might be viewed by people who go, what the hell are those? So this is a talk that may benefit and would benefit people who don't have anything to do with ColdFusion or Lucee, which are application servers that this meetup is focused on. So again, welcome if you're somehow found this on YouTube, and I'll only spend a little bit of time focused on the CF specifics. So yes, this topic is of interest to anybody who wants to run Redis deployed in any of many ways, and not just Redis, but Valkey and other alternatives. I'll explain all that as we get into the presentation. So if you're considering using Redis or some plug-compatible alternative like Valkey, maybe you want to use it for caching, maybe you want to use it for document store or database, that's capabilities that it offers. And then some of you use application servers like ColdFusion or Lucee, where you can have them defined to store sessions in Redis, yes, and not just Redis, but Valkey and other alternatives. So this talk is for that audience. That's who I'm really speaking to. If you're thinking about using that Redis sessions feature of CF or Lucee, first question is, how do you get it implemented, and where could you put it, and what if you can't put it on your own machine? Well, that's what this talk is all about. You need some implementation somewhere, whether on your own environment, locally in the network, or as a service. And we'll talk about those many ways to run it and those alternatives to Redis itself. And many of them are free, and some come at cost, and they usually have added benefits that make them worth the cost for some people. But I'll be showing you options that are free. That's the bottom line. And they're all fairly simple to implement. And really, any one of these should suit your situation. Maybe more than one will suit you. I just want you to know that these options are available and how easily you can get them implemented. That's the point of this talk. And I'll not only discuss it, but I'll show some demonstrations of Redis and alternatives. And I'll show you how primarily some people would say, well, I want to install it. And there are installers for Linux and Mac and Windows. Now, there is a gotcha in that Windows doesn't have recent installers, and I'll talk about that. It's an old version, and you can't even find it readily. But here's a cool little tip. You can implement Redis on Windows using Adobe's ColdFusion API Manager and its data store feature. It's an installer, and I'll show you that. And some of you will be on Windows and don't want to deal with all this other crap I'm going to show you. Well, for you, implement the CF API Manager data store, and you're done. So again, we'll show that later. But maybe you don't want to implement it as an installer. Maybe you want to implement it on a VM. Or if you're on Windows, you may know about WSL. Well, I'll explain what both of those are. Obviously, to some people, right? I realize that some of you are like, you don't need to explain that. Don't worry, I'm not going to spend a long time on it. But I want to make sure everybody knows that's an option, because when you look at resources that talk about implementing. Sorry, I just noticed that somehow my screen. Oh, I think I'm looking at. So I've got multiple monitors, and I think I'm looking at. There you go. That's never mind. Don't worry about that. They may not be able to implement it on their own machine, and I want you to know that you can put it on a VM or WSL. And if you don't know what those are, I want to at least explain what they are briefly so you can follow it up. Because what I was saying was resources that are available talking about how to implement Redis or any of these alternatives. They'll list all these ways, and you might go, oh, what does that mean? Why would I use it? How could I use it? They'll also talk about the option, and I'm just telling you, these are options. You could pick among them. They'll tell you about the option of implementing Redis or an alternative via containers, by which they mean Docker or Podman if you use that, or containers as a service if you run containers in some cloud platform, or whether you deploy containers using Kubernetes or whatever. There's lots of ways to deploy containers. I'm just going to talk briefly about that to give you context so that when you see that, you can contemplate whether that's the right solution to you. And I'll even show one really easy solution that should suit most people's needs. So again, won't be a long time on that. Then lastly, you should know that you don't have to install it at all. I get it that some of you are in situations where you're not allowed to install something, or you don't want to install something, or you don't want to mess up your machine, or you're just playing with it. You don't want to mess around with installers or VMs or containers. You don't have to. There are cloud platform deployment options. If you use AWS, Azure, GCP, and others, there's options to deploy it on the cloud. If you don't use those, don't worry, because there's finally Redis as a service options. And I definitely want you to know about this because that's the easiest way. Honestly, don't worry if you don't want to install it. Don't run containers. Don't do VMs. Don't have a cloud platform. Okay, you can just easily, for free, have Redis running in just a couple minutes as a cloud service that's unique to you, secured to you. Nobody can get to it but you. And let's say if you're using ColdFusion or Lucee, you can point the CF admin or the configurations capabilities of these app servers to that cloud deployment of Redis that you just created a minute ago. And instantly you're storing sessions in Redis. And there's a free version and it could suit your needs and it's free for production. Or there's paid versions to suit higher needs. So again, that's, I'm presaging these things that we're going to talk about. That is what we're going to discuss. You should definitely be able to find an option among all of those. And some of you are going to go, wait a minute, I've heard that Redis has had a license change and what's up with that? We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about alternatives that are available, some recently, newly available, and maybe seemingly the important option to consider, and others that have been around for a while and you maybe didn't even know it. And those options have their own installers and their own containers and their own cloud deployments sometimes. So I'm just saying, you got lots of options. That's the bottom line. There are plenty of choices. That's what I wanted to talk about, is that there's lots of ways to deploy it. And you could have any of these running in minutes and start testing it or using it for production. I've done it. I'm telling you, it's true. And that's why I put this presentation together, because I find when I talk to a lot of people, they sometimes get a little lost in the weeds of all those options. Now, quickly about myself, I do focus on CF and Lucee server troubleshooting as an independent consultant. Don't work for anybody else. And I assist organizations of all sizes and different experience levels. Wherever you are, I can almost certainly help you. I work remotely, safe and secure via shared desktop. I prefer Zoom, but we could use Meet or Teams, whatever you like. And I solve most problems in less than an hour. And I teach you as we go so that you don't need me for that problem again. And then maybe I can teach you a few things and eventually you don't need me at all. And that's okay. I just move on like a fireman, go into every fire that comes up, or Johnny Appleseed spreading seeds all over the place. And here's the biggest point, is your satisfaction is guaranteed. If I spend time with you and you don't find it valuable, then you won't pay for it. It's as simple as that. So give me a shot. I'm here to help solve problems. You can learn about my rates and approach and satisfaction guarantee and online calendar at carehart.org/consulting. But that's it. We're going to move on from that. I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling anything. This is just information to help you out, sharing my experience and that of others. All right. And then finally, this presentation, the slides you're looking at right now, are already online at my website. So if you go to carehart.org/presentations, or just use your phone right now to click on that QR code, that'll take you there. And I have the presentation, this PDF slide set, and the link to the recording, which while I'm talking, you'll be taken to this live stream. But after the session's over, that will be also the link to the recording. So you can give that URL out and anybody can find this recording. Or let me just show you in my browser. This is that presentations page, arehart.org/presentations. And you can see that I just list them in order of recency, which ones are coming up. The top 2 are coming up in a couple weeks. And then there's that one right now, 176 that we're doing, and on and on and on. And if you click on them, it takes you down to, it was to be presented today. There's the PDF. There's the recording. Again, the live stream for now will be available after the meeting. And then the description if you need to share that with anybody. And there's the link for sharing it right there. You can right click on it, copy link, share that with somebody else to go right to that. All right, let's move on. And I don't see any comments or questions, so I'm going to keep going. So I said this before, but I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to say it. I thought I should say it earlier, so I said it then. This talk is on the online ColdFusion meetup, and it speaks to CF and Lucee folks, but it is generic to a wider audience. Anybody interested in Redis and alternatives can benefit from this. And the more important point is that CF and Lucee folks will want to see the other talk that I have. It's called Using Redis for Session Storage in CF and Lucee, why and how it's easily done. Because there's a bunch of stuff I'll talk about in that presentation that I'm not discussing here. And I gave this talk already once at CF Camp in June in Germany, and I had much of this crammed into a small section, and I thought, I really need to break it out. I'm giving this talk, the one coming up, that using Redis for session storage, I'm giving that talk in a week and a half at CF Summit in Vegas. And I wanted to do this talk so I could break that stuff out and say, hey, if you want to learn more about the options for implementing it, go watch that recording. So that's this recording. So this talk will supplement the talk that I'm doing next week, 2 weeks from now in Vegas. So you'll want to look at that. There's already a version of it from CF Camp. Now I will say that you can't watch the recordings of the CF Camp unless you attended until next year. They'll release it. So if you're going to CF Summit, you'll see it. Now I realize CF Summit doesn't record the presentations either. They have us repeat them a few months later in an online summit. I'll probably repeat that talk using Redis for session storage. I'll probably do that somewhere in the coming weeks after the summit for the sake of people who didn't go to CF Camp, aren't at CF Summit, and want to see it without waiting till next year when they may do the online version. All right. So anyway, that's that. So again, there's the link directly to the Redis sessions talk. You don't need to go there right now. I'm just letting you know that's how you get to it directly. All right, moving on. Let's talk first about implementing Redis via the installer. And let's talk first about finding them. And some folks do find installers are the easiest thing to use, and they do exist. Let me just say, I know some of you are like, I don't ever install anything. I use X or I use Y. Well, I get it. So we'll talk about other options in a moment. But for those who prefer installers, they do exist, but only Linux and Mac binaries are offered. Wait, what? Yeah, so if you go look, because you're like, well, I thought you said Windows. Yep, well, I said something earlier. Let's repeat the point now. So this is the link I just showed on that page. This is the link to getting the downloads or other options for implementing Redis. So this is redis.io. They're getting started page. And look, there's Redis on Linux, Redis on Mac. And you might go, well, they say Windows. Yeah, I get that. We're going to talk about that. They don't offer a binary installer. For Linux, they do. And let me just show you, for those that are using Linux, it's very clear. It says right there. You just go in there, whether you're on Ubuntu or Red Hat and so on, they tell you the Yum or apt-get, whatever you're using, they tell you how to get it, how to implement it, and it's usually just down to, in the end, that you install Redis. Okay? And install Redis. So I'll leave you to read this if you're running on Linux. That's pretty straightforward. On Mac, it's just using Homebrew. So boom, done. Simple as that. So again, it's very simple to implement Redis on Linux or Mac. Okay, what about Windows? Well, with Windows, they say it's not officially supported, and you can install it using these other means. And the other means they show you is to implement what's called WSL or WSL2. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, shortly, probably 5 or 10 minutes from now. But my point is, when you implement WSL, then you're just installing Redis like you would install it in Linux, because WSL basically gives you Linux on Windows. Again, we'll distinguish it from a VM. Hold that thought. I'm just saying they're talking about doing WSL. There is no binary installer for Windows. You're actually implementing a Linux inside of Windows, whether as a VM or as WSL, and then you're implementing Linux version of Redis. You can do that. Go for it. We'll talk about that. That's an option. I will say that if you're on Windows and you wish there was an installer like there is for Linux and Mac, there used to be one for Redis. Both Redis and Microsoft offered a Windows Redis installer, but they no longer do. They stopped updating it some years ago. And stuff, we'll leave it at that. They don't offer one. That's the bottom line. And they may say you should be using Linux and you should be using WSL. Okay, yes, one could argue you could and should be using that, but some people don't want to do those other things. But those options do exist today that can suit Windows folks. But I want to tell you about one that I'm going to show you that you could use on Windows today. And it's not what they talk about. I'm going to talk about it. Now, I said quick demo on Linux. I just wanted to show you what I showed you, how simple it is. You just install it, and they show in that doc page how to start it and stop it as well. So I'll leave you to, again, investigate that on your own. I don't want to take the time right now to install it as I could, but it's simple. I mean, you saw how straightforward it is. There's nothing really to show. Just read the docs. If you're on Linux or Mac, do that. Now, if you do, I want to say, however you install Redis, and this applies to some of the ones that are going to come up. If you install it on your own machine, it's going to be really easy to use. If you install it on another machine in your network, then you got to be aware of something. Like if ColdFusion or Lucee, for example, is running on machine A, but you install Redis on machine B, you could with the installer or as a VM or whatever, WSL, go on containers. They may be on different machines from each other. That's what I'm talking about. Or if you're just using a Redis CLI command line, or if you're using a Redis client tool like Redis Insight, it doesn't matter for now. All I'm saying is if the thing that's calling Redis and Redis itself are on different machines from each other, you need to be aware that at a minimum, you'll probably need to open a firewall port for Redis on that machine or in your network firewall. And now some people go, oh, and this is obvious stuff. Well, it's obvious if you install software all the time on multiple machines, but when someone's doing this for the very first time, they've never used something like Redis on a server that uses ColdFusion or Lucee. Sometimes they're not responsible for that. They just, it's a nice self-contained environment. If you implement a database on another server, you got to deal with the same thing on the database server, but sometimes people do that once 5 years ago and they've forgotten about it. If you put Redis on some other machine and you call it from yet a different machine, you'll probably need to open the firewall for that other machine to let somebody, you or anybody else you want, get in on that Redis port. All right, I'll leave it at that. But I also want to point out that in the Redis configuration, and there's a config file, there's a bind value. And that bind value in some circumstances may be set to be bound to only 127.0.0.1, meaning it's presuming that it can only be talked to from a client sitting on the same machine. It's not the address from which the request is coming, it's the address to which the request is going. If the request into Redis is to 127.0.0.1, it lets it in. If it's to some, from some other machine with the IP address of this machine, it doesn't let it in. So you might need to change it, is my point. And you're changing, again, not what's calling it, but what is the machine that's hosting Redis? What IP is it of that machine? And you'll need to change that configuration. And I'm just going to say, there's discussions of that in some of the other resources I'll talk about in a moment that just discuss managing Redis. I just wanted to give you that heads up because some people try this stuff and it all goes great on their own machine. Then they put it on another machine and things start to not quite work, and they might figure out the firewall, but they might not think about this bind value. So anyway, reach out to me if you need more direct help. I wanted to say that you can use networking tools to watch what ports are listened on and what bindings they have, like Telnet, or Windows Resource Monitor has a nice feature to show you in the network tab listening ports. And if you were to successfully change this, you'd see the quote address column change from IPv4 loopback, which what it was for that 127.0.0.1, to whatever IP address you said it should be allowed to be talked to as. Now, I know that's all kind of confusing. I'm sorry, I just had to get it out there. Leave it at that. Remember, this is being recorded. When you try it on your own and you trip over it and you Google stuff, try to find the answer. Hopefully this will make more sense. Here's the page that talks about configuring and securing and some other things that you might want to be aware of about Redis. I didn't want to get into that any further. This is not how to install Redis, right? That's not the talk. Remember, the talk is options for implementing it. And I'm talking about the options. So we're talking about the installer for the moment. We'll talk next about VMs and WSL. Again, this topic that I'm sharing with you would apply to any of them. So I wanted to get it out now, as long as we're talking about the installers. Now let's move on to the Windows installer and this caveat that exists. And I said this already, they offer installers binaries for Linux and Mac OS. I should have rectified this or reconciled it. I'd said it earlier. Anyway, there you go. You could do that, or you can do that. And there's these alternatives. But what if you are on Windows and you don't want to use a VM or a service or anything like that? Well, you can implement Redis on Windows using Adobe's ColdFusion API Manager. Wait, what? Yeah. So even some people that use ColdFusion will be like, what are you talking about? What's the API Manager? And some of you know it came out in CF 2016. In CF 2016, Adobe created a thing called the API Manager, and it has a couple of services. One service called the API Manager, and one's called the API Manager Data Store. And the Data Store service of the API Manager is just Redis. They just implement Redis. And it offers a Windows installer. So you can get the CF API Manager, install just the Data Store, and you're getting Redis. Now, it is an older Redis. It's version 3. And some people go, oh, that's terribly old. Well, yeah, it's old, but it works. Let me be clear. I'm saying that if you're using ColdFusion sessions or Lucee sessions, and for many other people's Redis needs, you could be okay with running on Redis 3. Now, somebody might go, oh, but you shouldn't because it's old and it's not updated. Okay. There's other options, right? Everything else I've talked about and what I will talk about is to get recent modern versions. But if somebody just wants to simply implement Redis on a Windows machine for the sake of maybe demonstrating that this stuff can work, they may be willing to suck it up and run this old version. And some people even go ahead and run it for their production needs. And they can, because of firewall protections and other things, they don't worry so much about that it's slightly old. But let's leave all that for later. I'm saying it works fine for simple use of Redis. And let me talk about how you get it. You go to this URL. Now, in my presentations, I show the URL italicized. I leave off the HTTP and HTTPS crap. So they just put that in your browser, and it will take you to this page. I'll just go ahead and take you there. Takes you to this page, which is it's not a page for downloading ColdFusion. It's really for downloading things related to ColdFusion. Now, they happen to have a link to the trial edition of ColdFusion, but that's not what we're here to discuss. As some of you know, this has a drop down and you can get stuff for 2023 and stuff for 2021 and even still stuff for 2018 and Java. Well, we're not here to talk about all that. Whether you want to use 2023 or 2021, I want you to see that among these other downloads, one of them is the API Manager. You may have never even noticed that was there. Yes, you can get this ColdFusion API Manager, and this is the one for 2023, which is the same as the one for 2021. It really didn't change, but that's not important. Here's the full installer for every OS, Windows, Linux, Mac, and even Solaris. There's the full installer, and you could use that and tell it to just install the data store. You could do that. Or, check this out, they have a separate add-on installers. And the add-on installers looks the same, but it's different. It's smaller, and there's one for each OS. And if you ran that, it would just be to install what they call the add-on services. And they tell you here that's the data store or the analytics server. Well, again, you could run that and tell it to just implement the data store server. And that's it. And I'm telling you that if you get this, which is free, and you download it and you run it and tell it to install just the data store, in a minute, you will have Redis installed and running. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. But I'm just saying it's that simple. It's really that simple. Okay, so that's just all that to remind you in case you come to find this later. That's why I write these points in here for you people who don't necessarily watch the recording. Now, I will tell you that until today, the 2023 page that I showed you, it only offered the full installer even when it showed the links for the add-ons installer, but they fixed that just today. So thankfully got that fixed overnight because I saw it last night. It was still true, and thankfully it got fixed. So that's awesome. So anyway, you can do what I just showed you. And again, I'll tell you that the API manager for 2023 is no different than 2021, so that would work. All right, moving on. So you tell it to only install the data store, which again is Redis, and it will ask you for a license key. And then before I do it, I just want to explain this. It will ask for a license key, or you can choose a 30-day trial, do the trial. The trial really is only for the API manager itself. And we're not, for ourselves, we are not on this example discussion things. We're not using the API manager at all. So we don't care about the trial. We don't need a license. We're just using the data store service, which is Redis. And Redis is free. You don't need a license for that. So again, you're getting an older one, but it's going to be implemented. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that. I'd already downloaded it. Here it is, the Windows. In this link here, I clicked on that, and here it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and open it. And because it's implementing a service like Redis, it's prompting me to elevate my permissions, of course. I didn't have to tell it to. It did it for me. And I'm just going to show you. I know it's going to take a moment, but let's just do it. And I'm watching the comments, and so far, no comments. If anybody has one, feel free to speak up. And I could have, had this already running, I suppose, and we wouldn't be waiting for these 30 seconds, but it only takes about 30 seconds. And I just want you to see how straightforward it is. You just download that add-on installer for whatever OS you want, and you install it. If it's Windows, you do this, and you run through this UI. If it's the others, you get a command line interface, typically, for installing it. But you're basically asked the same things. And here, look what we're asked. We're asked, welcome, and click next, and accept the license agreement. Again, you read that and accept that. Where do you want to put it? I'm cool with that. It'll, C drive, D drive. I tend to put things on my D drive, so I'll put it on the D drive. That's all you got to do. Notice where it is, ColdFusion 2023 API Manager add-ons. Not that we must know that, but it'll benefit us to know it. But here's the key point. Look, do I want the analytics server? No. Did I even get asked if I wanted the API Manager? No. This is the add-on. I'm just getting the data store, and that's it. Do I want to do a cluster? Well, check it out. There's a link there, and I have it in my presentation. You can configure this to even be clustered Redis. Yes, right? So that's not bad. But for now, we don't need that. We just need our simple single implementation of Redis, and that's what I told it to do, and it is doing that. And in a moment, it is going to be done. I will have Redis installed. And it says, well, what do you want to use as the port to get to your Redis? And it picks one. If you're happy with that, leave it at that. And what do you want the binding to be? Remember, this is trying to secure it so that it's only accessible by default if you make requests to it from the same machine. So your request from your machine is going to go to 127.0.0.1. That's going to go into that Redis, and Redis is going to say, yes, I accept requests to 127.0.0.1. And if you're happy with that, cool. If you want to change it, feel free. And that's it. It's all it's going to do. And it's not very big. And in a moment, it's going to be done. It's really a very small install as CF installers go. This one's quick and done. And in the moment, I've got Redis installed. And there's really nothing much more to say. It's telling you there it is. That's where it is. That's the port to it. And you can now, work with it. What I want to say before you, go trying this on your own is that once it's installed, you will find there was a Redis password created. And it's in this Windows implementation of this ColdFusion API Manager of this version 3 version of Windows. It's in a file called Redis Windows Conf Properties. So let me just quickly open up my Windows File Explorer. And again, I appreciate that some of you don't use Windows. You don't care about Windows. It's okay. We're going to get on to other stuff in a moment. This is speaking to the people that are running Windows. Often I find a lot of CF people do run CF on Windows. Don't hold that against them. No victim shaming. All right, so here's the 2023 API Manager add-ons. 2023 API Manager add-ons. And in this data store folder, here is a Redis. And what was that? I want to make sure it was Redis Windows Conf Properties. So notice there's a Redis Windows Conf and a Redis Windows Conf Properties. And I'll go ahead and open it because this is bound to my own machine. And also my port 6380 is hidden by both my OS and by my firewall. So you can't get to this. I don't care that you're going to see this password. And in here, There it is down here in white. In the Linux, sorry, in the Redis config file, they configure the password using a require pass property, and that installer that we ran pre-configured this password. That is the password, big long random string. When you go configuring something like ColdFusion or whatever to talk to it, that's the password you need. Well, guess what? I'm going to show you. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to go, I don't know if that, it just belled at me, so I maybe didn't copy it. Do it one more time. There you go. And I'm going to go to my CF administrator. Again, if you don't use ColdFusion, don't worry about it. And if you use Lucee, don't worry about it. There's an equivalent for Lucee. And I talk about that stuff in the other talk. But here's the CF admin page in the CF admin on the server settings, on the memory variables. Some of you don't even know this is here. The default is to store sessions in memory. But if you want to tell it to store it in Redis, you can. Now, this is my configuration using Redis Cloud. I'm using that also. For now, I'm willing to sacrifice this. I'll just take that out. And I'm just going to say 127.0.0.1, and it was port 6380, and it wanted that password, and that's it. And I'm going to click verify connection. Hey, there was, I think it's just that I got timed out. I was sitting on this page from earlier. My bad. So let's try it one more time. No big deal. Live shows. Ain't nothing like it. For you littles out there that know what I'm talking about. All right, so here we go. 127.0.0.1.6380. Come on. Go on. Oh, it may not be running. Duh. So let me look at my services. And it would be called the ColdFusion 2023 API Manager data. So that is running. Gosh, sorry. I don't want to take the time right now to debug that. I'm tempted to, but we have so much to cover. Failed to connect any host. I'm definitely using 127.0.0.1. It was 6380. I don't have it on screen to make sure I might have typed the wrong port. I don't want to try to sort this out right now. It absolutely does work. Trust me. And whatever doesn't work, you reach out to me and I'll help you if you try it. And then I'll do a blog post of whatever I did wrong. But I'd like to move on because there's so many other things to talk about. That was just for the audience of CF people. All right. And there's where I was telling you where it was. And there's that. And then again, you can configure this API manager to be clustered Redis. And so there's the link for that. I'll leave you to look into it. And it talks about 2021 and it shows screenshots from 2016 because this stuff hasn't changed since that version 3 that it includes. So let's move on. All right. So now implementing Redis on a VM, right? Switch gears. I'm sorry if you were not on Windows, if you wouldn't install it on anything but your own machine, or you wouldn't have installed it on your own machine. Let's move on. What if you want to install it not on your own machine? You can't put it on your machine. Well, you could put it on a VM. And you could just install it and use it that way. And it could be a Linux VM, and you could easily implement the Linux version, for example. So that's what a lot of people will do. And there's a lot of VM options out there, but I just want to tell you, for those who don't deal with this a lot, and again, remember, I'm talking to people who maybe don't typically install other things in their environment that's talking to something like this. They have their ColdFusion and their Lucee on the servers that they use. And now we're talking about this other thing. Well, you could have a VM on Mac. It could be running Parallels or VMware or VirtualBox. And yes, all three are options. On Windows, you could use Hyper-V or VMware or VirtualBox. And yep, it's available for all three. There's also a pretty cool thing you guys should know about called Windows Sandbox. It's an ephemeral local testing VM. As soon as you close it, it goes away. There's no persisting of it. So it's not everybody's cup of tea. But for playing with something like this, you should check out the Windows Sandbox. It's a very quick VM, spins up. It happens to be running Windows, but the point is you could then install that Windows version of Redis that I just showed you, and you're not touching your machine. It's literally like a VM that's spun up just to do testing. Anyway, moving on. Then if you're on Linux, and yeah, there's reasons to consider doing a VM for Linux. You could install this stuff on your own Linux, but maybe you don't want to. So sure, fire up a VM, VMware and VirtualBox, and there's other options. Again, I said these are the main ones. The point is then installing Redis on those would be the same experience as your own machine, but it's not your own machine. And then remember my caveat, that's now technically another machine. So you've got that potential for firewall issues and that binding issue. So I'll leave you to remember that and go back and look at that. I'm just saying, yeah, you can install it on a VM and it's just another installation. And it's just not something that maybe some people do frequently. So I wanted to point that out. It's obvious to some people, but let me move on. What about this WSL thing? So for those who don't know, WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux, remember, we're only halfway through. We've got halfway of other stuff to talk about. So I appreciate some of you are going, here he goes with Windows again. Just bear with me. I'm talking to that audience. Just take 5 minutes away for a second. So WSL is Windows Subsystem for Linux, and it's a free feature built in, available to you from Microsoft, enableable on Windows 11 and 10 machines. And it enables a VM-like experience. It really implements a Linux kernel, a real Linux kernel on Windows. And by the way, you Linux people who are hearing me, maybe just listen for a second, because you might, poo-poo Windows left and right, but you might be tickled to go, hey, wait a minute, you're telling me there's something where I could show my Windows friends that they could be running Linux inside of Windows? Yes, and we're not talking about Wine. We're not talking about an emulator. We're talking about Microsoft, as you may know, has really embraced Linux in a way that people never fathomed would be possible. And starting a few years ago, they created WSL. Now there's WSL 2. It's even better than it used to be, and that's been out for a couple of years. And I'm saying it's a VM-like experience, implementing a real Linux kernel on Windows. And then you can deploy any Linux distro you want. Not any. There's many that they offer. You name it, you probably find they've got one, and we can learn about that, more about that in a moment. But the point is, then you use it like a VM. Yes, you can use it like a VM, but it's really more than just a VM. I just want to tell you, don't just go, oh, well, I could use VirtualBox or I could use VMware. I know you could, but this is more than that. It really implements some incredible integration between Linux and Windows and Linux, and they can go back and forth. You could literally run an exe inside of the Linux, and it'll fire up on Windows, the host, the thing you wanted to run. So you could do that. You can run Windows software within the Linux and back and forth. It's amazing. And I know that may sound like that's a big rat's nest of crap. Okay. Somebody, who wants to leave it at that. But others who find this intriguing, you should explore it. It's very powerful. And getting beyond, into more is beyond the scope of this talk. I just want to say that you will find, like we saw in those docs, it said, well, if you're installing Redis on Windows, you want to implement WSL and then implement the Linux installer. And yes, you can absolutely do that. You would just install that Redis like, a Linux install, but you're doing it on Windows as if it's a VM. And it's really more than that. I'll leave it at that. And I just wanted to show, for those who haven't seen it, a terminal window here. Here I am at my, Windows command line. You could be at PowerShell too. PowerShell command line, doesn't matter. And if I just say WSL, I'm in my VM. And, I happen to be in that directory, but I can do that, and I can pwd that, and I can ls that. I mean, I'm in. This is Linux. This is not some virtualization. That's my real deal thing. So I could then, now that I'm in this, Linux implementation that's on my Windows box, see, it's my Windows command line. And if you use terminal, this is terminal. If you use terminal, you'll see that you can even open, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to click the little arrow. If you use the Windows terminal, which is a kind of more evolved command line feature of Windows, I can open specifically my Ubuntu. I have an Ubuntu. I have a Debian. I have a Fedora. I have an Alma, not on this machine, but on another machine. So you can open particular ones using that. There's a command line way to do WSL-D and name the distribution. Again, you can go get other distributions to your heart's content. I'm just saying it's really Linux, and you could then now have, in our case, let's say Redis installed as that Linux in that WSL, and I could call upon that from my Windows version of ColdFusion or my Windows version of Redis CLI, or I can go into the Linux and do it from within Linux. So again, we could go down the rabbit hole of permutations. The point is, that's what it is. It's pretty simple. That's all there is to say. let's move on. Again, I still see no questions or comments. I'm going to move on. What about implementing Redis on a container, right? So maybe you don't want to do an installer. Maybe you don't want to mess with VMs. Maybe you like Docker or Kubernetes or variants of those. Yeah, you can do that. And many resources for installing Redis and these alternatives will suggest it as an option. So you should be aware of it as an option to those other three. And they are indeed powerful technology. Containers are really powerful and very well suited to something like Redis, because this would be an example where you might have a box where, and for, let's just say for a moment, you're just on Windows or you're just on Linux or you're just on Mac and you don't want to install it, but you want to use it. And you might wish you could implement it in some way that was much more self-contained than an installer. And of course, a VM is one way to go, but a container is yet a different way to go. And so this is a great option to do something like Redis in a container. And if you don't like it, you can delete the container and it's gone. There's no installer to clean up. There's no uninstall to do. There's no VM you created. Again, we could go down lots of discussion about this. But I will say that a lot of resources presume you know what containers are about, or they may focus on just using Docker or just using Kubernetes, or they show a Helm project or whatever. I don't want to get into all that. I can't get into all those alternatives, but I'll just say they do include options like running via Docker, or specifically something called Docker Desktop, more on that in a moment, or Podman, which is an alternative to Docker, or a container as a service. If you run on AWS or Azure, GP, and other cloud platforms, they let you deploy containers in their environment. And you're, again, not installing it on your environment. And you're not installing it on their environment. You're implementing the container. It's an image, a Docker image or a container image of Redis. And that's whether you're on your local environment, you might be using Docker Compose, you might be using Kubernetes. There's other mechanisms to deploy and orchestrate things. And I just want to talk about an option that might appeal most widely to those interested in testing and demonstrating this Redis. And this is whether you're on Windows or Linux or Mac. So hear me out. Docker Desktop. So Docker, the company, offers Docker Desktop, and it's a way to easily implement, as it were, Docker and Kubernetes, actually, and containers on your machine. And I'm not just talking about on Windows, which is what most people use it for, and on Mac OS, but even Linux. Now, I want to clarify this because some people are going to go, you don't need Docker Desktop to do Linux. You could just install Docker. Yes, I know you can. I know you can. But Docker Desktop is more than just Docker, and it does some interesting things itself that could be worth your considering. It implements a VM to run containers, and it adds a management layer and an interface for managing these containers. And you might go, well, why would I want a VM if I'm on Linux? Well, not that you would want it, but that's the way Docker Desktop works. Even on Linux, if you run it, it will create in the background a VM for you, and it will take care of it. It just does it. And if you're on Mac, it'll create a VM, and it just does it. And it's a Linux VM on Mac, yes. And on Windows, it creates in the background using WSL for you, and it takes you through the steps. Point is, it's very simple. You end up with WSL and a VM running Linux, and the containers are implemented in there. Well, that's all just background. You don't need to worry about it. You just implement Docker Desktop, and boom, you can run containers. And they happen to be Linux containers, but it's handled for you. You don't necessarily even know. Now, some of you are going to go, yeah, but that's from Docker. They charge for that. Well, time out. It's free for personal use. It's free for educational use. And it's free for use in small businesses. And you might go, oh, it's a small business. A small business is what they call somebody with, a large business. A small business is less than 250 employees or less than $10 million annual US revenue. They have to license it. Everybody else, including for production use in a small business, less than 250 employees, less than $10 million annual revenue, you can use Docker Desktop for free. Now, this isn't a talk on Docker Desktop. Talk about it because it's an option that some people, again, depending on where they're coming from, they might have old information and they go, I don't want to use it. I don't need it. It's not something for me. It won't work on Linux. Whatever. I've told you everything so far is all factual. All right. And the point is that it enables a full suite of Docker commands on your command line or an interface I'll show you in a moment on your machine, which is called the host. You can do management of Docker stuff. And it offers a UI for viewing and managing images and containers and a whole lot more. And I just want to take you real quick to my command line and do like a Docker. Actually, it's funny. I'm in my Linux. Let me show you this. I'm in my Linux, happen to be in my WSL. I'm going to say Docker images. And in there, I have none. But I'm going to exit out of here. And I'm going to do the same Docker. Oh, I don't happen to have any. That's funny. I guess I should have had both. I don't know why this particular machine right now I don't have any. Wait a minute. Yeah, I don't know why. That was my mistake. I'm just using the wrong command. Docker images works. There's my Docker images. And had I been in my WSL and done Docker images, that's more like it. I wanted you to see that it's the same. Whether you're in the Linux or you're in the Windows, you have the same containers, the same images, and you can use commands in the Linux environment, or you can use commands out here in the Windows environment. That's the current images that I have. That's not important. I just wanted to show you that, yes, you can use your Docker command line once you have Docker Desktop installed and running. And then here is the UI for it. And it would show me if I had any containers running, and it has helpful stuff of what's a container, how to run a container, more about Learning Center. Then I can see my images like I just showed you. I don't have to know the command line. I can find my images. I can search for them. I can see when they were created. I can see if they're running. I can spin one up, blah, blah, blah. And if you know about Docker, you can use it to manage volumes and builds and run Docker Scout and so much more. So again, we're not here to talk about Docker Desktop beyond me telling you it's a powerful tool. It's useful for people on Windows or Mac or Linux. Don't dismiss it because you don't think you need it. Unless you know you don't need it, you should at least look at it. And you can learn more about it at this URL, docker.com. If you just Google Docker Desktop, it's the first thing that comes up. I'm going to leave it at that. And that was the demo I showed you. So, all right. Now, and I'll say perhaps the best for last. What if you don't want to install it anywhere, and you don't want to install it on a network, and you don't want to use even Docker? You just want to have a simple option to test things out before you commit to it, right? Or you want to use it in production this way. Here's the point. There are multiple providers, both Redis and others, who offer Redis as a service. Redis as a service. You just sign up online, and instantly, you have a Redis database to use. And they give you the URL, the domain name and port and the password, and you just plug those in. And some of them are free. Some of them are low cost to at least start with. Their cost might add up if you use them in higher volumes than you thought you might. But the point is, you do get a managed service. You get all the benefits of being a managed service, and some people that's worth paying for. So I'm just saying. So let's consider some of the options. First and foremost, I want to tell you about Redis's own. It's called Redis Cloud. It's at redis.io. And they have a free version that you can even use for production. It's low volume, but it could suffice, certainly, to demonstrate the stuff I've been talking about. And I even use it in my production environment because my volume isn't such that I'm worried about that. And you can manage all that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Point is, you just go to redis.io, you create a free account, you create a database, and I'll just show you. I've got that tab already open. Yep. And here's the database I already created called CF Sessions, but I'll just show if I wanted to create a new one, I could just click that plus sign. And it says, what are you going to use it for? And in our case, either one, would work for what we're doing. It doesn't say for sessions, but does it say that? Yeah, durable sessions. Yeah. So right there under database, it says, I can't put my mouse there, but it says for a durable session store. So technically we'd be doing it as a database. My bad. You'd want to use a database. Now I'm going to click on that, and it says, what kind of subscription do you need? And it starts at $5 a month, but there is a free version. I don't know why I'm not seeing that. I don't think that's changed. That is interesting to me. This could have changed since I last looked at this closely. I'm pretty sure I have it. I use it. I still use my free version. I'm not paying for it. So, sometimes they hide free versions under other places. I'm not going to go digging around for that, because I just want to say at a minimum, this would start at $5 a month. Some of you might say, yes, I'll pay $5 a month to get a Redis on a service where all I got to do is click up buttons and it's created, and it'll be up to 12 gigs with up to 16,000 operations per second with 99.99 uptime and up to 10,000 connections. That's going to serve most people's needs very well for sessions of a ColdFusion application. Now, I wonder, now before I leave this, if I click custom, does that let me maybe choose a free one? Yeah, so I'm not going to try to figure that out right now. But I know they do have a free one. There's got to be an answer. I'll look into that later. It's not important right now. But the point is, that's a simple example to go in there. And when you do it, it would give you the endpoint, and the endpoint would be a domain name, long URL, and a port, and the password. And you would take those values and put them into whatever Redis client you use, Redis, the Redis CLI, or the Redis UI interfaces that are available, or that ColdFusion or Lucee administrator, or your code. Again, we're not going to get into that any further than to say it's that simple. All right, so I'm going to move on. There's other Redis as a service provider options. I want you to know about this. They're not the only one that offers Redis as a service. Look, Aven, A-I-V-E-N, I'm going to go to their website. And they offer lots of different things. If you look at, I don't know if it was, there's some, yeah, that I could tell something was definitely in the way. Get out of the way. Oh, you guys with your buttons popping up all over the place. All right, so if I go to, look up here. When I mouse over platform, I can get, they offer Kafka and Flink, and there's also Postgres and other things. But look, there's Dragonfly, we'll talk about in a moment. Valkey, we'll talk about that in a moment. And then they have, I called it on the screen there, Aven for caching. What they call Aven for caching is actually Redis. So they have an option there called Aven for caching. It's funny, I don't see it right now. I saw it last night. I double checked all this stuff. It's definitely there. But the point is, it was just called Aven for caching. And that was like, what? Caching? Well, it's Redis. And it says on their page, it's actually Redis. So I'm going to move on. I showed you that they also support Dragonfly and Valkey, and those are alternatives to Redis that we'll wrap up with in a moment talking about. Then some of you might be interested to know that DigitalOcean has managed database for Redis. It's commercial. Aven had free and commercial. DigitalOcean's is commercial. There's the link for that. And then Upstash is another company you should be aware of, Upstash, and they offer multiple options, again, of deploying things. And there's right there Redis, and you can create a database for Redis. And it's got free and commercial implementation. So it's just as easy. I'm just trying to say all these options are simple. You go to them, you create an account, and if it's free, you get a free, low-powered, capable version of Redis, and you're given the URL and the port and the password, and you stick those into whatever's talking to Redis from your environment, and you're done. It's really that simple. Now, if you do have a cloud platform, you might be deploying already in some infrastructure like GCP or AWS. All the major cloud providers do offer also Redis as a service. There's Amazon's Elasticache for Redis, Azure's Cache for Redis, Google's Memory Store for Redis, okay? And then if you use Alibaba or Tencent, there's others that are out there. And some of them offer free tiers, some offer low cost to start, costs can rise up. Again, you get the benefits of managed service, which might be worth the cost for you. So just see the online resources for each of those. They offer their clear intros and setup and usage info. I knew I wouldn't have time to get into any of those. I do want to talk about this Redis licensing change because I'm sure some people are like, wait a minute, you're talking about Redis all this time. What about Valkey? What about Dragonfly? What about these alternatives? All right, let's talk about that. So announced earlier this year and implemented starting in July of this year was a change as of Redis 7.4 where they moved to what they call a dual license. And these are the licenses rather than the previous license. And that's had a lot of people in a tizzy. Let's be clear. It's still open source. There's no change to your use of Redis. Don't hear the words, hey, they changed their licensing and go, I guess I can't use it anymore. You can use it. You might go, what's the point? Well, it's mostly affecting managed service providers and the cloud providers who wanted to offer Redis. They were getting Redis for free because it's open source, right? And they were selling services. And they deserve to get paid for the infrastructure they're offering, but Redis felt like that was taking money out of their pocket. And this has happened with other platforms as well. But the point is other applications. But I'm going to move on and say, again, it doesn't affect your use of it. And if you want to stick with an older version prior to 7.4, it wouldn't affect you at all. You may not want to stay on an older version for too long, but the point is you could absolutely use an older version. And if you want to learn more about this, it's worthy of understanding. If you're into this, if you bring up you want to use Redis and somebody says, no, we shouldn't use Redis, they changed their license, I'd recommend you go read this blog. It's one of many, but it talks about Redis's adoption of that dual source. Okay, so I'll leave you to read about that. And then what does it really mean for managed service providers? I'll leave you to read those things. I just want to say that this is not the first time something like this has happened. It happened with Mongo. It's happened with Elastic. It's happened with Terraform. So this is just the nature of open source with cloud deployments. There's, a tension among those service providers and the people that build these software. So that's getting sorted out. The whole world is blown up, calling this unprovoked war of aggression. I've seen those words used, and alternatives have come out. So let's move on. This is the last thing I want to talk about. Alternatives have come out of the woodwork. Some did exist prior to this, but because of this, there's been an explosion in interest in alternatives to Redis. There are plug-compatible Redis alternatives. Let me be clear. I'm saying everything I've talked about to this point was about Redis, but there's these other options which are not Redis, but they're like Redis. They work like Redis. They respond like Redis. They use what's called the Redis protocol. So moving on, some are free, some are commercial, some are downloadable, some even have a Windows installer. Some are available as Docker images. Some are available as cloud services. Yes. So among those options, just know there's Dragonfly. There's their URL. There's Garnet. It's an open source project from Microsoft. Yes. There's KeyDB. There's KV Rocks, open source project from Apache. Memori, commercial product. Redict, and Valkey. And you can learn more about all of these at those websites or on my website. CF411.com is a website of mine. I have many categories. One of the categories is Redis DB. There's a temporary problem with that link not taking you to the right place, but it'll take you to the right page and you can find this stuff there. I'll fix that after the call. Anyway, I track which of these are downloadable, which one's free, and so on. I want to talk about Valkey, and some people may feel like I buried the lead, and that's the way you spell it technically. Lead is an older word for the lead story of a newspaper. Anyway, in mentioning Valkey last, because I even mentioned it at the front, right? Because I knew some people would, if I just said options for installing Redis, some people would say, I don't want to watch that talk. I don't use Redis. I use Valkey. I just listed it last in the list because it was alphabetically last in that list that I just gave you of alternatives. But it has taken the world by storm since the Redis licensing change. Many former Redis maintainers and committers have moved to Valkey. Major cloud providers are backing it. So you will hear more about Valkey. And in some people's eyes, all you should be using is Valkey. Nobody should be using Redis anymore. That's a little, much stark, I would argue. But the point is, Redis exists. The company behind Redis is still updating it. They're adding capabilities to it that may not get added to Valkey. We'll start to see this kind of split over time. And those who were in the ColdFusion world know this happened with, in a sense, not the same reason, but there is ColdFusion and there's Lucee, and they're vastly similar, but they're not always exactly similar. So we who are in the world have to deal with it. Well, that's going to happen with Redis and Valkey over time. But for now, I'm going to repeat, for now, everything I've talked about, you could do today with Redis and it'll work. And most of it will work exactly the same with Valkey or any of those alternatives. So it's cool that there's alternatives. We, users of this stuff, by and large, it's like, the Clash of the Titans, we're just doing our thing using these guys, okay? And I'll just tell you that if you want to learn more about why AWS and Google and Oracle and others are backing Valkey, you can read about it. That's enough. It really just doesn't change anything we've talked about so far. It's just one of many alternatives, and they're all compatible for our needs. They're compatible, and that's enough. That's all we need to know. So wrapping up, if you want to learn more, there's a lot more you can learn. This isn't a talk about getting started with Redis. This is a talk about options for implementing Redis. There's CLI and UI options for managing Redis. There's capabilities to monitor what's going on in Redis, all very important. You can view the data that's inside of Redis, all very important. And there's configuration and tuning and SSL, TLS setup and replication and clustering and all that stuff. I knew I wouldn't have time to get into it. That's not the point of this talk. But there's ample resources online, both from Redis and those alternatives and in the internet in general. But I do want to say that I covered those first 3 bullet points in my other talk on using Redis for CF and Lucee sessions, because beyond showing how to use them and then briefly talking about this stuff, which you can see I was able to elaborate here in ways I couldn't possibly in that little bit in that talk. But I go on in that talk to talk about, okay, now you've got Redis implemented. You've got CF or Lucee connected to it. Yay, that's step 1. And step 2. Now step 3 is you might want to keep an eye on it. If something doesn't go right, what's going on? What's the traffic like? What's the data that's in there? Blah, blah, blah. So I cover that at the conclusion of that other talk. So again, watch that other talk to learn more. And to that point, as far as resources for learning more, there's that getting started. I would definitely recommend you start there. There's a page they have called management, and it talks about those configuration and securing matters. And then there's that another thing about installing it properly, which is really about running as a service. And then my presentation, actually, I put the wrong one in here. That's this one. My bad. I should have shared the one for the CF and Lucee Redis sessions. I'll correct that and post the correct URL. But anyway, I gave it to you earlier. I just wanted to repeat it here. And then many of those things I've shared with you have links with more information of various sorts like this. So it is something you can learn more about. I just want to wrap up and say, yeah, you can. You probably don't have to. You might find it just is so easy to install. You just start using it and it just works and you don't have to worry about it. But hey, like with a database, yeah, you set up the database, you write some SQL, and it generally works. When it doesn't work well, there might be problems connecting to it initially, or there might be ongoing long-term problems with load, or there might be, presumptions about configuration that are not right for your needs. So that's just the same. Redis is like another database. It's just a different kind of database. It's not SQL. So I'll leave you all to explore it. It's a variant of NoSQL. But moving on, it's just very easy to use. That's all I want to communicate. It's very easy to implement. There's plenty of options. Pick one that works for you. Try it. If nothing else, get the service capability like Redis Cloud. It's free. Try it. And again, if you're interested in using this with CF and Lucee, see my other talk coming up at CF Camp. At CF Summit. See the slides that are already online from the version at CF Camp. I'll be revising it now that I've done this talk to take out some of the details that were in there. But that's it. So in summary, just saying, it's really easy to implement. Either it's Redis itself or these plug compatible alternatives, whether you want to install it on your own machine or in a VM or via WSL or via containers or via cloud platforms or via these dedicated Redis as a service solutions. And if you don't want to use Redis, yes, there's alternatives like Valkey. So most of them are free. Some of them are commercial. All of them are really simple to implement. And I'll just leave you to explore more about using it, managing it, monitoring it. Or you can reach out to me with questions on the talk or to share feedback, and you can do it directly or publicly. I'm easily reached through social media at all the normal platforms as Carehart, just as simple as that, Carehart. Or you can email me at charlie@carehart.org. And that's that. And I've noticed there's no comments or questions. And in fact, I can't see readily. There may not even been many people on the live stream. And I understand that because I just announced it yesterday and word maybe didn't get out. And that's okay. I wanted this to be recorded more than anything so that in my next talk, I can point to it. But of course, other people are going to find it over time, and I hope it'll benefit them. And since there doesn't seem to be anybody there commenting or saying anything, I'll give you just another 20, 30 seconds to pipe up if you want to say, hold on, I got a question. But otherwise, I hope you've benefited from this talk, and I'll look forward to some of you attending the CF Summit. And then again, just watch the presentation. I'll repeat that one on the meetup. This is the ColdFusion meetup. I'll repeat that Lucee and CF sessions in Redis talk separately somewhere in a few weeks, I expect. That's my plan. And hope to have other talks in the meantime. I have others I've wanted to do, but I was kind of pressed for time recently. So, all right, doesn't seem to be anybody else, so I'll go ahead and shut her down. We're just a little over an hour. Again, until the next time, look for more at coldfusionmeetup.com.